What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Unstoppable Dad Project for another week. Thank you once again for taking the time out of your busy life to spend some time with us and listen to what we've got going on here. Just before we get started, as always, if you could take the time to like us on all the socials, so Facebook and Instagram, Facebook, The Unstoppable Dad Project, Instagram at The Unstoppable Dad, and make sure that if you are listening to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, or any of the other podcast platforms, you have subscribed so that you can be notified when we drop a new episode. Also, we have a YouTube channel where we'll be putting up video versions of these podcasts. Now, this week, diving back into probably recovery training mode and going to have a little bit of a chat about sleep. Now, sleep for all us parents, especially us new parents, is a commodity which is sometimes very hard to come by. So the kids get sick, especially, or you've got a newborn. Obviously, sleep is just something that can sometimes be like an unobtainable goal. But sleep is extremely important, and it's extremely important for a whole bunch of reasons. But if we're looking at how important it is to us personally, obviously it is a way for us to recover from the stresses of the day before. Now, I'm sure a lot of you would have heard the 8-hour sleep rule, and some of us need that. Some of us need more. Some of us can get away with having less, but generally that 2 hours, so that's 16 hours, that 16 hours of work to the 8 hours of sleep is what our body kind of needs in order to put us in a state where we're up and refreshed and we're ready to go for the next day. But when you've got a kid or kids or 3 or 4 or how many of them you've got, it's hard to get 8 hours of straight sleep. And something that I've come across a lot personally and with the people that I've coached is just exactly how hard it is to get sleep. When your mind is racing, you've got 1,000,001 things that need to be done. And you also are, you're just struggling to keep up with everyday stuff that you need to do. So what I wanted to look at today is kind of some things and some tips that I've given out. And I know have worked for us as a family, have worked for people that I've been working with, and just ways that you can try and maximize the amount of sleep that you get. Now, you can't control how many times the kids wake up during the night. Especially if they're sick, there's going to be times where the total amount of sleep you may get over a night in its sum is like 60 minutes. There's going to be other times, especially if your kids get older, where maybe they're starting to sleep through the night, where you might be able to get more. But one thing that I find a lot of people do, and I'm guilty of this as well, is kind of just reserve themselves to the fact that they're not going to get sleep. And sometimes they miss out on the opportunity to actually get more sleep. So one of the things that I tell people is give yourself a set bedtime and a set wake up time. And obviously try and make sure they're like 8 hours apart. So if you work a standard, say 9 to 5 job, you may get up at 6 or 7. Make sure that if you're getting up at 6 per se, that you're in bed going to sleep at 10 o'clock. So that would mean that you're asleep by 10, you wake up at 6, and whatever happens in between there's going to be things that are going to be outside of your control. If that happens, then that happens. But the very first thing is actually setting up that parameter so that if something doesn't happen, you are able to maximize the amount of sleep that you can get. Because all too often, what I'll see is people will just stay up till all hours of the night. They'll get to bed at like 12, and then they'll still have to wake up at 6, and they've only got 6 hours. And it might be on one of those nights where the kids have slept through. So they've missed that opportunity to get that extra 2 hours, which from a recovery standpoint, from a standpoint of being at your ability to deal with stress the next day, it is so important to maximize the opportunities that you're going to get that sleep. So that's the first thing. Obviously, have that set time and try and set that out for 10 hours. The second thing is when you are going to bed, and I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard this before, but try and eliminate technology a minimum 30 minutes before you go to sleep. And this is a hard one. And this is a hard one, especially for those of us that maybe are running businesses or have jobs that require us to use our computers or our phones quite a lot. But it is something that for a lot of people takes actually a very high level of discipline to do. And that means that phones are off, you're not lying in bed scrolling through your phone, you're not on the computer, reading a book, trying to eliminate as much screen time as possible. For some of us, maybe that is watching TV. It's not ideal, but I know that in the past, dealing with a lot of people, like, watching TV for 30 minutes after the kids go to bed is actually something they do to help themselves mentally unwind. So if that's the case, then, you do you. But if the opportunity is there and it does take a little bit of discipline and potentially working away from habits that you might be used to doing, trying to eliminate technology 30 minutes before you go to bed will firstly get you to sleep quicker when you get to, let's use the 10 o'clock, 6 o'clock scenario that we went through. It will get you to sleep quicker when you get to that 10 o'clock. And then it will also enable you to go through your sleep cycles quicker as well. And we have different sleep cycles that the longer we are asleep, the more we progress through those cycles. And it takes a particular amount of time for us to progress through the first two stages into stage 3, stage 4 sleep. And it isn't really until we get into those latest stages of sleep, which generally for a lot of people can take a few hours to actually get there, let alone when you close your eyes and you lie down, your brain is still racing. Your mind is still in overdrive because it's been overstimulated from screen time and things like that. That pushes that out even longer. But that's stage 3 and stage 4. When you get into those later stages of sleep, that is where the real magic happens from a recovery point of view. And if you are constantly up and down, which again, back to the original point, sometimes you can't help that. You may never get into those sleep cycles, which may limit the actual restorative nature of sleep. That doesn't mean that it's useless if you don't get there. There's a lot of information that has come out around naps that has said that they are quite beneficial, especially mid-afternoon. But for those of you that, maybe can't take a nap in the afternoon, which is me and probably a lot of you, by getting rid of technology before you get into bed, it's going to enable you to get into a deeper sleep quicker, which means if 4 hours into sleeping, you have to wake up to tend to children or whatever it is that you've got to do, there is an opportunity there where you may have been able to get a good amount of REM sleep and a good amount of restorative sleep, which will actually help you, again, deal with the stresses which is going to come up the next day. So step 1 is have a set bedtime. I'm going to go to bed here and I'm going to go to bed there. Try and make them, 8 hours, 7 hours apart. And then whatever happens within there doesn't really matter. The second thing is try to eliminate screen time, about 30 minutes. If you can get away with an hour before bedtime, that will help you get into a better level of sleep quicker. It will help you getting to sleep quicker and not only that, but maximizing the amount of recovery you get from that block of sleep. Other than that, one thing that, and this is one thing where I've got caught out. One thing that I used to do I drink a lot of water. And for some of us who are trying to be healthier, I know drinking a decent amount of water for some people is a struggle, right? People that I've worked with over the years sometimes struggle to consume enough water. But one problem that would arise for me when I would drink a lot of water is I would have to, if I drank it a lot too late, I would have to wake up a lot to go to the toilet. So when we had kids, obviously, if I'm doing something, if I'm having to get up and go to the toilet, Now, this tip I'm about to give you isn't going to eliminate necessarily the need to do that potentially. It will probably just limit the amount of times you need to do it. But if I'm drinking a whole bunch of water leading up to going to bed, and then I'm having to get up to go to the toilet 2 or 3 times a night, and then the kids are waking up 2 or 3 times a night, all of a sudden, like, I've created extra broken sleep than what I necessarily need to. So the other thing that I started doing was really limiting my water intake after about 6 o'clock. Now, I've got a pretty early bedtime. I get up quite early. I'm up, 4:30, 5 o'clock most mornings. So we're normally in bed by, say, 8:30, 9 o'clock. So for me, it was like 6 o'clock. I'd start to limit my water intake. And what I found was that just made the amount of sleep I was getting that much better, just because I wasn't getting up all the time having to go to the toilet. So if you are somebody who drinks a lot of water and you're finding you're having to do that a lot, that is a really quick tip. Try to go, 3 hours before you go to bed and start kind of dialing back. That doesn't mean stop drinking water, but it just means instead of having a lot, you just have a sip here and there to, quench your thirst or whatever the case might be. So that's kind of tip number 3. That wasn't in the list of things I was going through. That was just something that's just come up as I've been talking about this. But the first 2 ones are a big one, making sure that you're setting that time out for yourself to go to bed, because you're not going to be able to control every single night what happens in between that I'm going to bed and I'm waking up. But you can control when you go to bed and when you wake up, mostly. And then the other thing is, if you can start to eliminate technology about 30 minutes before you go to bed, that will help as well. A couple of other things that you can try and do from like a sleep hygiene standpoint. If you in your bedroom, trying to eliminate technology from the bedroom, so TVs, phones, things like that, if you get that out of the bedroom, use your bed for sleeping, and the other thing that beds are used for as well too. If rather than if you're a person that lies in bed a lot and scrolls through the phone, that can affect the quality of sleep that you get, because your body recognizes that as a place where your mind's going to be in overdrive, especially in today's world where we have everything and all this information at our fingertips. Where our brain, we can be in almost a mode of hyper alertness while we are scrolling through, due to dopamine hits and all these other chemical reactions that are going on within the brain. So if you're doing that while you're lying down in bed, your body, your brain, your mind can perceive that as a place where you're in that heightened state of alertness, therefore feeding into the fact that maybe you're not going to get as good a quality of sleep as what you should be. So they're probably the 3 biggest ones that I would do. Having things like blinds, it will help. It'll help you get sleep for longer. Making sure there's no like ambient light coming in from the street. Depends on where you live, obviously. But setting up where you sleep so that it's kind of optimized for you to get the best quality of sleep when you are able to do it. And having things like TVs in there and stuff like that is not the best way to do it. But they're probably the 3 big tips. The first one, and this is probably in order of priority as well, too, I would say, especially for parents. And I know for myself, this is the order of priority. And for a lot of people I work with, this is probably the way it should be addressed. Number 1 would be set those bedtimes and where you're able to, because there's going to be times where maybe the kids are playing up, you don't get them to bed when you need to. I get it. I've been through it and worked with a lot of people who've been through it, but the whole idea of doing this stuff is you're not going to be perfect, and you're not going to be able to do it every single night, day in, day out. You may only be able to do it 80% of the time. There may be weeks where you're only able to do it 2 days out of the week. That's okay. You just try and be as consistent with it as you can, because when it comes to these little human beings that we've got to look after, there's one rule that really I believe happens, and it's that no 2 days are ever really going to be the same. There's going to be a curveball that they're going to throw at us, whether it is through them learning and navigating life, or it's through from their health point of view, or it might just be that they want to sit up and they want to ask you all the questions in the world and try and unpack their day. And that's probably more important to address that, rather than, if it's going to get you to bed an hour later, some days that's worth the hour less of sleep. But enough of the tangent, back to the point. Number one, set your bedtime. Okay. So set when you're going to bed and set when you are going to wake up. Try and get that 8 hours apart. Make sure when that time is set, like you're either going to sleep or you're in the process of going to sleep. Because if it's one of those nights where the kids aren't going to stir, you don't have to wake up, you'll be able to get that 8 hours of sleep in, no dramas. Number two, try and eliminate screen time like up to 30 minutes before bed, because that will settle your brain down. It will help you get into those later stages of sleep where the real magic happens, right? That's where you are recovering from the stresses of the day. And for those of us that train, that is also where growth hormone is released, which will allow you to recover from, training stresses and so on and so forth. And then the last one is set up your environment to get the most out of your sleep. So try and eliminate technology from the room, use the bed for what the bed's meant to be used for. If you need like blackout curtains because there's a lot of ambient light, try and set that up for yourself, because that will help you again get better quality of sleep. Sleep is sometimes hard to get when you are a parent, but it is very, very important. Whether you train or you don't, it is something that you need to do, because it is our body's way of dealing with and recovering from the stress of the day. And that's just not physical stress. That's also emotional stress. It means that if you are able to get a good night of sleep, you are going to be able to pour from a cup that is full, and you are going to be able to give more, not only to yourself, but for those around you. I'm sure if you're listening to this and you're a parent, you know what it feels like to be sleep deprived, and you know how much just those littlest things can get on your mind and get on your nerves. So try and set yourself up for some sleep success. Hopefully those tips help. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's anything particularly that you're struggling with, but hope that helps. Thanks for listening, and I will see you all next week. Goodbye.